Hey guys, we're going to talk briefly about how to use Desmos to create a graph design project. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to create an account so you can save your work as you go. And you can see up here the green button lets you create an account, and it's very simple to do. All you need is your name, your email address, and your password, and that way you can log in with that same credentials every time you want to work on your project. I'm going to close out of this because I already have an account. Pull up my Firefox, and you can see over here my account already exists. So when I start designing the graph and working on this project, the first thing I'm going to want to do is give this project a name, give this graph a name. I'm going to call it something like Desmos Design Project, and we'll click on Save. Um, The other thing you're going to want to do pretty often is hit the save button. You can see right now it says no unsaved changes, but anytime I make a change in my window, it's going to turn green, letting me save anything that I change. And that's something you're going to want to do pretty often. So let's start by sketching a graph. Let's sketch in a graph y equal to 3x squared. So you can see a pretty simple quadratic function graph appeared. And I'm going to hit save, and that's going to let me save my changes. And if I hit the button with the three lines going over here, anytime I log in, I'll be able to pull up this Desmos design project and I'll see everything that I've been working on. Let's now talk about the constraints that we could set. For example, what if I only wanted my graph to show up in quadrant 1? I didn't want anything in the quadrant 2. I want all of this to disappear. So I can set some constraints. And the way I would do that is to put a curly bracket. And in this case, I'm going to say x greater than 0. And the reason I said that is because I only want this graph to show up when the x values are positive in this direction. So you can see it cuts off everything in quadrant 2. Let's try another graph. Let's do a linear graph this time. We're going to put in y equal to, we're going to give it a negative slope. Let's do negative 2x plus 5. So you can see our graph appeared. Another thing I could do is I could change its color. So let's say I wanted this graph to be red as well. I can hit on the gear and hit the dot, and I can make it red or any other color of my choice. I'm going to keep it as blue. And then I'm going to add a constraint to this. And this time, instead of saying I want it to be bigger than 0, I'm going to put it in between two different values. For example, I'm going to want my graph to only start here and end at 2.5. So I can make this little like A looking shape. So just like we did up top, we can put a curly bracket, but this time we're going to say it's going to be in between. The smaller value is going to be 1 and the larger value. So we're going to put in a less than x and then another inequality symbol. And on the other side, we want it to be less than 2.5. So you can see what happens is this graph starts at 1. This graph starts at 1 on the x-axis and ends at 2.5 on the x-axis. And I could do the same thing if I wanted to cut this graph off in the y direction. I just use y. Let's demonstrate that. So I'm going to put in the equation y equal to, I'll do another quadratic equation here. I'm going to use negative 3 x minus 3 squared. And this time, I want to move this graph up a little bit. So I'm going to put in plus 1. So I'm kind of looking at my design and I'm thinking, well, I'd like this graph to perhaps start here and end here. It might be easier to think about this as I want my graph to start on the x-axis where x is 0, and I want it to end where the y value is 1. So I want it to only be between 0 and 1. So I can pretty easily do that by putting in the curly brackets, and I'm going to use a compound inequality where I say that y is between 0 and 1, and you can see the graph now starts at 0 in the y direction and stops at 1 in the y direction. And then I can continue writing different graphs and experimenting with different functions until I have a pretty cool design that I'd like to maybe save and laser cut. So one other thing I'd show you before I'll end this video is, say you want to play around with the numbers, you're not sure where to position it. So instead of giving it specific numbers, you can try something like y equals mx plus b, which is the general form of the linear function. And now we can kind of play around with the m value and play around with the b value until we get something we like. So for example, if I like 1.3 for M and negative 3.1 for B, I can now go change 1.3 and I can change B to minus 3.1, and I can close out of the sliders, and now I can start thinking about which constraints could I use. For example, I could start this line at 2.455, and I could stop this line at 3.12 to only have this section visible. All right, so see what you can do, be creative, and good luck.